All right.
How you doing?
Hey, Joe. Nice to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
the invitation.
of course. Good to see you again. So,
Yeah, we saw
yeah,
each other in Finland, of all places.
it was great actually. I really liked the place where we had lunch. Been there a couple times.
Yeah,
So for the audience, I'm not sure if this is common elsewhere in Europe, but in
I
Helsinki
don't
they
think
have
so.
these community almost cafeterias in a way, and really good food. Pretty good price, all things considered too. So
Yeah, I thought I never saw that anywhere else. And I thought it was a great concept for lunchtime. And also a big mix of people. Yeah, you
oh
saw
yeah.
construction workers going in there, but also bankers in suits. So it was really, looks like everyone just enjoys their lunch in such a place. And it was
Yeah,
very
yeah.
easy and good food and very reasonable pricing. So I liked the concept too.
For sure. I'm gonna go back again. I did notice this at the public library in Helsinki, actually. They have a similar setup there, sort of a communal dining area. So I thought that was, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. But
Yeah. So I
yeah,
thought Finland overall was interesting, and this Finland, the Helsinki Data Week, I also thought was a very nice event. Had a very good atmosphere to it in a way.
hmm yeah, it was. Um, I guess to kick things off for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, Carsten Bange. I'm, as you maybe also hear from my accent, I'm a German and built Bark. That's a market analyst focused on data and analytics. So we look at the software vendor side. We follow around 400 vendors in the space,
Mm,
and that's by far not everyone's that's in there.
right.
And we help companies to make the right decisions. So it's really about technology investments. So who fits to my requirements? It's about data architecture. I mean, we all know it's a big mess in most organizations. It's getting bigger every day. So finding or defining a good architecture is something we do a lot. And then it's a lot about strategy and culture. So
Mm,
defining a data strategy for organization that really pays into a business strategy, but also thinking about how to create a data culture in organizations that actually support the data strategy, that really helps to bring people's mindsets, but also abilities to a level that they can actually leverage data and analytics. So that's what we are concerned about. It's 60 people. It's a global organization. We're also very active in North America. With that, we are the only specialized analyst company on data analytics that's operating on a global scale. And it's
interesting.
growing, and we're having fun with that.
It sounds like a lot of fun. And it's an interesting business model. I don't think I've seen that very often, where you have the analyst side keeping track of industry trends, and then it seems like it's a consulting side as well. Is that maybe a fair way of describing it, or how would you describe the strategy
Yeah,
there? Okay.
it's consulting, but it's not the it's research backed and research based. I think that's the main difference. And we are not implementing because if you implement software, then you create dependencies on software vendors. And for us, the neutrality, the independence is key
Mm,
because we want to evaluate them and we be really critical about the capabilities and where something fits and not. So we cannot implement, but we have to understand it in order to define good architectures, but also strategies, but also make technology recommendations. So I think I agree. It's pretty unique,
yeah.
but it's also very interesting. I'm now in the market for 25 years doing this. We came out of university that started where we did a test lab for BI software. And with that, we started to have this independence and also the approach to really test things, look at it, and on based on this foundation of knowledge, we can make good recommendations.
How do you choose the companies, the software vendors that you track and follow?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there are so many out there. It's it's really based on segments. So we look at the data analytics markets. That's the first segmentation we do. And then in the data analytics markets, we have many subsegments. And to we have some products where we formally evaluate vendors. We call that BARC scores. Yeah? And for that, we have inclusion criteria because we cannot look at everyone. And these inclusion criteria are based on revenue and size, basically. So the vendors have to have a certain size. And by the way, it differs per score. It differs really on the segment we look at. We also look, or we take a look at the regional coverage. So
Mm.
we tend to include global vendors that at least cover more than one or two geographies in the world. Yeah, so not the small niche focused one that are only in one country or one region. And so that's maybe the approach for the formal evaluations, but we do look at many more, and so size is important, but then it's also the analyst interest. Yeah, we also look at many startups, and if we find something interesting and we think there is something to it, like a technology innovation, a uniqueness in any sort. Or a good fit for requirements in the market, for user needs, then we also follow the vendors more closely. So it's not a very strict set of required like criteria, but let's say we do want to be knowledgeable about any vendor in that space of a certain size. Yeah, let's say
Interesting.
at least something like if a vendor has more than 10 million revenue, we definitely should know about them.
Makes sense. And then do you talk to the company, or is this more of kind of an external facing relationship where you?
It's an analyst briefing. That's what we want. So the vendors should set up a briefing for us that includes information on the corporate development. So we want to understand, yeah, how is it growing? What about revenue? What about employee numbers and so on? And then the major parts about the product. We want to see the product. We want to understand how it's built and what it's doing, the functionality, and who's buying it for what purposes. And that's basically the formal way of interacting with us. That would be the NS briefing. And then we do have more project-oriented interactions.
Mm.
That could be like a consulting project where a company asked for like a short list for a certain set of requirements, yeah, where if we find something might have a fit, then we take a closer look, and then we look at the requirements of the company
Yeah,
and often have to have a discussion with the vendor how good they actually fit here. Or if we have like a score evaluation, then obviously we have our criteria list with like 200, 300 criteria, and then we go into a deeper discussion with the vendor.
interesting. I can imagine that there's some tension with the neutrality aspect because there's,
Always.
yeah.
No,
Tell me more.
yeah, sure. No, it's always a good topic because some people even doubt that you can be neutral.
Sure.
And obviously, any human being has some biases. Yeah, so some things we like better than others, and what we can do as an analyst company be yeah as independent, as neutral as possible. Yeah, and we have several ways to ensure that. For example, in our work contracts, it's made clear that no one can have any stake in any of the vendors we are looking at. Yeah, so we want to eliminate any personal interest to recommend or yeah to recommend a certain vendor. As a company, we can or we have processes to make sure that, for example, there is not a single analyst doing an evaluation for anything. Yeah, so because that's the way to always challenge also the biases people always
Yeah,
have, yeah, to make sure that the quality it's, I mean, it's a standard measure of quality assurance. But for us, it's super important to make sure that these individual preferences are at least leveled out in a certain way. And thirdly, as a company, it's super important that your business model is not dependent on a few vendors. Yeah, so we make sure that a single, or right now, I couldn't think of a single vendor that would make up more than like 1 or 2% of our revenue. So if a vendor comes in and tries to blackmail you, which actually happens a few times from time to
mm,
time, yeah, they go in and say, well, it's not blackmail, it's a bit different, yeah, and maybe they are. I'm always a bit. I don't want to point fingers here, but sometimes my feeling is that there might be analyst companies that do it this way. So vendors come in and say, well, if I give you now this and this amount of money, or I buy this and this from you, then surely my evaluation will improve in the next score you do. Yeah. And that's something we don't do at all. We are just tell them go to hell. We don't need your
Mm,
money. Obviously, we also are revenue driven, and
yeah.
obviously it's. But if you try to influence us, then we can live very well without you. And this is the independence you need financially. If you have like a very large client and they go in and say, "Hey, hey, hey, we continue to be your client, but you have to rate us better" or something like that, then
Mm.
you're in trouble, I think. When we don't do that.
I think that's the criticism of some of the analyst companies out there. I'm not going to name names, but in order to get into a certain spot on their um, their rankings, I've personally seen this where it does feel like it's pay to play. Um, and and I think it's interesting because you're one of the few like independent analysts I know who I think is well, independent, right? Because it feels like the industry from the outside when I hear analyst companies, I'm like, okay, so like what sort of grift are you gonna have me do as a company? Like, who do I gotta pay? You know, and that kind of thing, right? And I think it, it's definitely got a bit of a reputation. So it's refreshing to hear that there's uh, not that behavior happening as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. Um, So what are some of the trends that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, in many different areas, obviously. I mean, we do have, if I maybe start with the organizational trends, we do see, and that's a global trend, still a very big shift towards more decentralization.
Mm,
So data analytics is becoming more present in any business department. And this used to be like 10 years, 15, 20 years back, mostly finance and controlling. But by now, it's really any business departments that's investing in data, understanding the value, buying software in that space, or also educating people and just trying to get more value out of the data they have. And this decentralization obviously creates interesting challenges. Yeah? So how to support that? Yeah? Where should people basically organizationally sit? Yeah? Is it a central data analytics team? Is it more decentralized? Is it both? How can they cooperate, collaborate, stuff like that? So data mesh has been the big discussion 23. That was something everyone more or less talked about and tried to understand and also started to implement. And it basically, from my point of view, gave the decentralization trend a name and a good one because it was, yeah, good for marketing internally. And interestingly, in 24, this already changed very quickly. So we saw less and less companies talking about data mesh. They were still in that process of decentralization, and it takes a long time. It's not something you do in a year or two.
yep.
And but somehow the term didn't seem to stick very well. And now they companies gave these initiatives different names. And but the individual parts of a data mesh, like data products, the federated governance approach, and the self-service data platforms and stuff like that, that is all still being introduced and still very popular with companies. Somehow, just the name seems to be less popular for whatever reason. I don't actually. I think it's not so super important. The trend is there. Companies are trying to yeah, get ahead with it. And the biggest topic and the biggest trend I'm seeing is surely trying to introduce data products as an approach. Yeah, so it has both. It's a way how to maybe build them, but it's also the question, how do I implement this organizationally? So now we see companies starting to define this role of a data product owner or data product manager and try to really get into a different way of working compared to the usual approach of running projects, yeah, running one project or a program of different projects. And this will take time, but it seems to be very popular. So companies see the advantage, see the benefits of doing that. So for me, that's a big trend. And that started a few years back already, obviously,
Hmm.
but I think that's something a lot of organizations are really involved with.
How do you measure or identify moves towards decentralization?
Well, I mean, we are in contact with a lot of organizations. Actually, we consult more than 100 a year. We are in discussions with several hundred a year, and then we survey several thousand a year.
Okay.
Yeah, so just we have more than 10,000 people responding to different surveys we do over the year. So I think that gives us at least a solid base of some understanding what's going on. And these topics of decentralization seem to be very, yeah, dominant,
Interesting.
for organizations. If you ask them, that's interesting. We can also see the nuances. Yeah, we see, for example, that the respondents to surveys or companies or people in companies we talk to in business departments see a much bigger need for that than people in these centralized data analytics departments or that are often also in part of IT. Yeah, so they also acknowledge that. We typically see have something like 50 to 60% say, yes, we need more decentralized empowerment. We need more empowerment in business departments or more data analytics. But if you ask the business people, it's 90%. Let's say, well, we need more of that.
Interesting.
So that's basically how we observe trends. We also look at industry events. We run some of our own, like the biggest ones in Central Europe, we organize. But there's also like Big Data London, just to name one, where many people go, I think, including you,
Yep.
where you could see, I think you get a good idea if you look at, I think they have something like 300 presentations over the
Yep.
course of the 2 days or something. I think it also gives you a bit of an idea what people are concerned about, what they're looking at. And that, by the way, it's a great mirror. Yeah. So in 23, I would guess gut feel 70, 80% was about data mesh in any form. And 24 was really 70% around data products.
Well, yeah, and Zhamak did the keynote, what was it, 22, I believe, um, at Big Data London. And then now she's just out working on her company right now. So it's interesting though. On the topic of data mesh and decentralization, do you see um, is it picking up in certain geographies, or is this universal, like, kind of global observation that you're saying?
It's global. It's truly
Interesting.
global. Yeah. So, but I think it comes natural with the rising importance of data. You have to answer the question, how do I scale that in my enterprise? And the answer probably is not to just have one single team that by default will be the bottleneck in trying to do that. Yeah. So, but I also think the answer is not, yeah, to do everything completely decentralized because there are two things. One is you always have to organize something centrally. Yeah. For example, in data governance, yeah, we always see a common set of things that are kept centralized, just because it makes more sense that
Hmm.
way, or it gives you better governance. And secondly, you also have to acknowledge that in any organizations, the level of maturity in different departments or domains or however you're organized are completely different typically. Yeah, so some really want this independence and want to be very, very, yeah, autonomous in a way in running data analytics. And others don't have the capacity or the skills to do that and are really dependent on support from central teams. And so I think the reality will always be a mixture of that. Yeah? It will always be heterogeneous in what you try to solve. And so it will be always like a federated approach.
Mm. And we were talking about this before we started recording, but data culture seems to be a topic that's very top of mind for you. How important is uh, something like data culture to decentralization?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand. I call it the yin and yang because you cannot do one without the other. So it's really data culture is the mostly it's about really about the mindset and the empowerment of people to use data and analytics beneficially and also ethically, by the way. But this is where you need to take care about the culture and the organization, and that's not so easy, yeah, because here we have to influence people's or human beings' behaviors, yeah, and we want to often to change their behavior, and that's a big topic. And often this is a bit overseen by technologists that are really excited about the great possibilities that now AI gives us, or all the advancements we see in data analytics. But in the end, it's really humans that have to adopt it, that have to
Mm.
use tools, that have to use data, that have to think about how can I improve now my business process here, my business outcome with all that great technology. And this is where we see the biggest challenge. But we also see companies really starting to acknowledge that. Yeah?
Mm.
And we run the first, I think it's the first data culture event specifically focused on data culture topics in the world, I would guess. End of January, it's called the Data Culture Summit. It's hosted
Interesting.
by Merck, the pharmaceutical company, because they have a big data culture team and they're really, really looking at that topic as a strategic success factor for them. And what we see is I did some research up front and I found now more than 150 people on LinkedIn that have data culture in their job title. Yeah, so they're called data culture manager or
Let
data
me go
culture
look at this.
strategist or responsible for data governance and data culture and so on so on. So there's not a common job title, but there is an increasing amount of people that even get yeah, in their job description, not only, but in their job title, get the task of looking after data culture. So I think that's a good sign that companies are aware that this is a success factor and they're increasingly investing in that. And for me, it makes not only sense, but it's really required to be successful with data analytics, to look
Hmm.
after data culture.
That's interesting. Is this a conference that you're putting on or an event?
Yeah, it's a BARC event.
It's
Uh,
it's
and
awesome.
Merck hosts it. They because we want to really do it as a community event, and there already is a community. Many of these data culture people already know each other. Yeah, so there are small networks, but we want to bring that together. We see a big community actually in Central Europe, but also in the UK. There are many, many, and a growing amount in France. Also, if you look at Europe, um, we do see obviously in North America, there's also a growing amount, but this one is more focused on the European data culture community.
I spent a lot of time in Europe. I obviously live in America, and I travel the world a lot. And I'd love your perspective on this. Um, from what I've seen, it feels like there are data cultures, at least from my experience, they vary by geography. There's, and we can get into nuances of that if we want, but in certain cultures, it feels like there's an appetite for risk taking, and in other geographies, certainly not, and so forth. What are you seeing in from your research in data cultures?
It's we ran now two data culture surveys to get more information on a broader basis. And we generally found that there are not so many regional differences. So
Interesting.
the topics that people are concerned with are often pretty similar. Also, the approaches they take. So, for example, we started, or we asked the question, how do you start? Or what are your most important initiatives, yeah, to support data culture? And it was quite similar, actually. Yeah, so
Hmm.
it's often it's really about fundamental things like data access. Yeah, so actually getting to the data, looking after access rights. Yeah, what is your principle? Is it right to know or need to know? How do I empower people? So literacy obviously is a big concern or a big initiative to support data culture and getting data governance right. But we actually couldn't find so many big differences because I think the key challenges are pretty similar. What you were referring to, like risk taking or different approaches to like data governance, obviously. Yeah, so there's this more regulative approach, looks like it in Europe. But I just read an article on the legislation that has been put forward in Texas, and it looks like very similar, or maybe even more than what we have in Europe right now. But anyway, yeah. So
Yeah.
obviously there are different approaches how to tackle technology, whether you're an early mover or late mover. but this whole topic of data culture seems to be more universal. Yeah?
Hmm.
Because as I said, it's really about how to change human behavior, and that seems to be overall from a higher perspective to be quite similar across the world.
How do you change human behavior?
You can, yeah, that's data culture. There's a sentence I always say is, yeah, you cannot order data culture. You cannot buy it. So what can you do is you can only influence it. Yeah? So that's what you have to try to do. You have to try to influence people to change their behavior. And can you do that? In data culture, we have identified 6 specific areas where you can run also initiatives and try to improve things. And with that, then you can actually really start to influence and change behavior.
Do you run into companies or organizations that feel like they should be able to push a button and data culture happens?
I think that actually, I never had that. Some are maybe not patient enough.
Hmm.
If they say, hey, I mean, now we invest, we even maybe have some people now that have this title, and why are we not changing faster? I think that's more the concern, pushing the button and changing things. I think that's first of all, it's very unrealistic, but I would say most people really know that.
That's good. Because I mean, the way you described it, it reminds me of the data science kind of hype back about 10 years ago, where the belief was, oh, we'll just hire data scientists, preferably PhDs with no working experience whatsoever. Hire them into our companies, and then magical things will happen.
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't work out for very many companies. Um, so,
Yeah. I mean, we had the same now with the Gen AI.
mm,
I would say it's quite similar. Yeah, in terms of expectations versus time it takes to actually bring something, and then you, as usual, discover, oh, the data is important, and it's not in the way that we need it. And first, we have to invest in that, and that takes time. And then, where's my AI use case now? And so I think that's similar patterns happening again. And but data culture from the outset is not presented as a technology topic. It's not like, hey, here is this great new technology, and once you implement it or apply it, then you get great things. Here it's really more this supporting character, making sure, okay, you have to understand, yeah, if you invest in technology, you also have to invest in your people and the culture and your organization, how to use it, and that it's being used at all, and how it's being used. And I think it's a bit more realistic because it's not overhyped. And by the way, there are no vendors. Yeah. So there are no software vendors for data culture. That also helps in terms of expectation setting because typically we get this overhyped marketing from the vendors. Yeah.
I'm sure after this podcast, somebody's going to start a company on that. Just kidding. Um, Okay, so you mentioned AI. We should talk about that. But I want to reconcile this though with data culture real quick because I think
Yeah.
some of the things I'm seeing on LinkedIn on at least a daily basis is if you're not doing AI now, you're going to be left behind. 2025 is the year of AI agents, so we don't even need people anymore. We'll just have AI agents running all of our functions in our company. And so it feels like there might be a bit of a tension with people who want to build a culture versus other people who just want to implement AI and get rid of people entirely. I don't know. I don't know what your take is on this, but I am seeing a lot of these sorts of um, I don't know if it's a dichotomy, but it's almost like people are living in two parallel universes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if if you look at it with a bit of distance, then the application of information technology has always been for the use of automating processes in the way of getting rid of people. Yeah. And now we maybe accelerate that. Yeah. We are maybe or we are shifting that to other areas of work, maybe. Yeah. And it's for sure. I'm not negating that there will be big changes and differences. And so what will happen? We will have more automated processes. and we will have less people involved in these processes. Yeah. But if we look at the history of automation, then typically, yeah, we want to do way more, which is sometimes forgotten in all the discussion. Yeah. And someone still has to build that, someone has to oversee it. And we, as humans, we typically come up with a lot of good new ideas, yeah, what we can improve, what we can do, and automate a lot of things that we are often not very good at or very fond of doing anyway. So I'm I'm really fascinated by the possibilities we have right now. And I'm also not thinking that we already know where this all will lead us. Um, but I'm a bit more optimistic. I
Hmm.
would say, hey, looking at the pace companies and people change, yeah, I don't think this will be so quick. That yeah, everything will go away overnight, and we will not have we have these companies like yeah, one guy having a great idea and then thousands of agents basically just execute it. I don't think so. Not in the near future. We'll see where this happens. So fascinating changes, but still taking care of people and the culture, I think, is absolutely necessary. This will not go away.
Mm. That is interesting. What are you seeing in terms of AI in your research right now?
I think we're still seeing a very big gap between, let's say, ambitions, ideas, share of mind, even of executives on the
Mm.
topic, and actual implementations. Yeah, so this is really still on a very, very low scale. What's actually being done in organizations. And this again, it takes way longer than people anticipated until things go really into production on a broader scale in organizations. And I think 2025 now will be the year where we see more. Yeah, right now, depending on the survey, not only our own, but others are talking about maybe 5 to 20%, somewhere in that range of organizations really have Gen AI use cases in production. Um, and this should increase this year. Yeah, so we have more and more companies going into production. Another trend I'm seeing is very clearly is that there's also a shift in the approach and what actually companies want to achieve. And at the beginning, like let's say 2 years ago, there was a lot of or these groups of people involved with the topic. They often were looking for this so-called killer use case. Yeah, so the big thing that would save them millions or bring millions more revenue and things like that. And often they couldn't find them, and then they were a bit disappointed. Not only they, but also obviously the people that funded this and had big expectations. And now what I'm seeing is that most organizations, I think now are looking at the small incremental improvements in processes, but in very relevant processes, yeah, where I have a lot of value creation or where I have a lot of people involved and a lot of effort. And this is shifting right now. And I think this is where we will go to. Yeah. So we look at maybe not fully automating processes, but improving process efficiency across the board in as many processes as we can. And so I think that's also a trend. Yeah, that this whole attention has changed a little bit.
Can you give me some examples of these types of automations that you're seeing?
Yeah, it depends really on the industry and the processes, but let's give me one example. Obviously, here in Germany, the automotive industry is super important and very big. And here it's very obvious. Yeah. So the data teams here often really now take a very process-oriented approach. And they basically look at any process they have. Yeah, so maybe starting with the purchasing, with the logistics involved, then looking at the manufacturing itself, the production, and then always asking the question, okay, what's being done manually right now, and what could be automated? Yeah, so that's a very process-oriented approach. And this adds to the approach we usually had with data science, which was more decision-based based, yeah, where we would go in and ask the question, okay, now this is the process. If at a certain particular point in the process, a human being would have better data, like maybe in a forecast from a forecasting model, yeah, maybe more information from other sources, yeah, would they be able to take a better decision here? Or could I even automate a decision because I basically run that not only rules based, but maybe also based on models I have. So that's the more, from my point of view, more decision-oriented approach. Yeah? And now it's getting really to the operational processes and taking a look in there. Okay, what can we do to automate it here? Can Gen AI help us? Yeah, to bring in more context. Yeah, to get a better interaction with the user here, to allow them to do the inputs in a different way by voice now, stuff like that. Yeah, it's really across any process.
Hmm. And you mentioned data is important. Um, what are you seeing in terms of these organizations uh, i- i- taking data more seriously and improving their data for AI?
Um, what do you mean with what I'm seeing? In what
W- w-
regard?
Well, I mean, you mentioned data
Yeah.
is important. What are you seeing in terms of organizations' efforts to, I guess, get
Okay.
their data house in order, so to
I mean,
speak?
that's the big discussion we always have. I mean, because if we look at it now, also in surveys, now, as usual, data quality comes in for as number one concern. Yeah. So, and data availability also is a big one. Yeah. And this has been the case in the 1990s. If we looked at data warehousing, this has been in the 2000s when people started to build data lakes and so on. Yeah, it was always coming back up, and people said, "Hey, but here are the problems and the challenges, and often they're in quality and accessibility." And it's coming back. So sometimes people are, let's say, some saying, "Hey, this is like Groundhog Day. Yeah, we had this again and again. And when will we finally start to change something?" And I think that's the big question. I do see a bit of hope, I would say. I
Hmm.
see more companies investing in their data foundation. And you can see that in data. Sometimes it's called data governance projects. Sometimes it's called really master data management projects. Yeah. So initiatives to improve the data foundation. It's maybe not still in the scale and size we should have it, but I do see more happening in that regard. So I think there's a bit of hope that finally this will actually be addressed.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm curious about this too. And it's interesting because I talked to some of my friends who are working on AI agent startups and whatnot, and their hypothesis is, well, agents will just do all the cleanup for us, and in fact, we don't need to care about the data anymore because we're talking about agentic workflows. So that was an interesting counter argument. I don't say counter argument, but it was an interesting perspective where. Um, to them, and these are data people too, which I think is interesting, but they're like, maybe we don't need to care about this. The AI
Yeah,
will do it all for us. So,
I think it's only half right. So what they are thinking about is anything you can automate because it's following clear rules, yeah, or clear patterns, yeah. And I think there's still a lot to do, and in that regard, they are right, yeah. So we can be way more efficient in filtering out, yeah, bad data, low quality data in that regard. But then I think the bigger problems typically are not in that space, but in the space where it's really about context. Yeah, where you really have to understand, okay, why could this be wrong? And you can only understand it if you have the context and also a general understanding. So now we would say, okay, Gen AI might be helpful here because it can provide context and maybe has a certain understanding of things. But this remains to be seen, I would say. So I would say the groundwork that you have to do in cleansing, where it's pretty clear what needs to be done. I would completely agree. Yeah, that's something that should be way more efficient, and maybe it's even to a degree that we don't have to care about it anymore. But the harder problems remain right now.
it seems like it. When I talk to friends who are, engineers at, these enterprise level Gen
Hmm.
AI companies, right?
Hmm.
it seems like the underlying data models that they're encountering in enterprises typically they need some work. So it's so again, kind of back to the same stuff we've been talking about for ages in this industry, getting the data house in order. But it definitely seems like one of the big cruxes where if the data isn't in good shape or if it's hard to query, then it's hard to query, right? It is what it is. So,
Yeah. I see it in two ways. If you look at data engineering, yeah. One is that we should become more efficient and we should be able to automate certain things like building data models, like cleansing, like data mapping, stuff like that. But don't forget, we want to do way more. We have to do way more of that. Yeah. So even if you automate more than half of it, yeah,
yep,
you definitely want to do more than two times what you do today. So it still remains to be seen whether we are really need less people to do that. But we definitely can do more here. Or yeah, we can be more efficient with using AI. But there's a second aspect to it that this AI technology also brings new challenges, new things. Yeah. So now, if you, for example, try to populate or build an LLM, yeah, suddenly you have new data integration tasks. You have new sources, you have a new target. And who talked about bringing data into a vector database 2 years ago? Well, no one. Yeah, so now suddenly it's the big thing. You have to do it. So it's a new data engineering task, and you need to be skilled to do that. And so this will, yeah, so it will also bring new tasks, new challenges, new things to do.
for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. The number of software engineers and data engineers I know who I think a couple of years ago could care less about machine learning and AI,
Mhm.
and now it seems like everyone is suddenly magically conversant in AI, like almost
Yes.
overnight. They just became experts. I don't know how this happened,
Yeah.
but now everyone's to your point. It's vector databases. It's using some foundation model you know, and whatever in the workflows. I mean, it's kind of cool to see in a way because it means that a lot of these tools are accessible to anybody now, whereas, a couple of years ago, I mean, you really had to know your stuff if you're doing machine learning. Now if you're doing machine learning, you still need to know your stuff. But with AI, which is sort of distinguished into LLMs and whatnot, it's a bit of a different ball game. But
Yeah, but
I don't know what it does though for workflows, right? And because I think we're also trying to figure this out. So,
I agree. But yeah, it has to be automated anyway to be able to do it at a scale we want to do it. Yeah, we can envision data being put to use in organizations. So I think that's always the most, a very important aspect to look at. Yeah, that we want to have this happen. That it's way easier. That we can use way more of this. Um, and this is, I think, important for this discussion. How many people do we need?
mm, how do you think about that question?
I think, as usual in technology shifts, and I'm sure we have one here, you do have this big friction that you have some jobs that get obsolete, but there are also new ones emerging. And this is what I'm thinking is happening here also. Yeah, so you have less people for certain aspects, and what I looked a little bit into was like the very fast advancements of LLMs for software development, for coding. I think that's quite interesting. Yeah. So probably in a few years, yeah, this is something you will really leave to a machine to develop code. But then still, yeah, you need to plan for it, you need to oversee it, you have to get the ideas where to use it, yeah, before something is being developed. And for sure, we will get way more of that.
Hmm.
And the big question always is who wins in a way. Yeah. So are there more jobs being created than that are destroyed by the new technology? So far, in any of these shifts, there have been more jobs created than destroyed, even though most people were very, yeah, had like a doomsday scenario and said, oh, this will all go away and now we will all be unemployed. This was not true. Whether this is different now, that's the big discussion
That's the big
because
question. I mean,
it is.
I mean, because yeah, I think there's a really good book. Was it Daniel Susskind wrote this book, A World Without Work, and so he's an
Mhm.
economist from the UK. But and traditionally, the argument was definitely true, where technology changes means that there's um, job changes, and you get to do
Yeah.
more. And but his hypothesis in that book was interesting, where he's like, well, maybe it is different this time. If you have something that can essentially replace a lot of knowledge work, fundamentally that's different than like what else is there to do, right? And I think it's a question that we haven't answered yet because we're still in the middle of this. I wouldn't say we're still in the middle. We're starting right now. So, although
We're
I guess
starting.
Sam Altman says ASI, artificial superintelligence, will be here imminently. So who knows? I don't know. So,
Well, I think I was surprised by it too, the advancements we are seeing in Gen AI. So we can have a long discussion what is the definition of an AGI and stuff like that. Um, but I think what we have to think about is that we will have technology available that's more intelligent than human beings.
mhm,
Maybe in only certain tasks, but maybe even in a quite general way. And that's interesting. But we as humans, we will bring it to good use and unfortunately also to some bad news, to some bad use as usual. But we can bring it also to very interesting use. And I think this is what we will see, yeah, that we now have tools available of unprecedented intelligence. And right now we don't really know what to do with it in a way. I always have this feeling, and this will start to develop, and we will use this tool, and it will be, I think, super interesting what comes out of it. Yeah. Maybe you saw this essay um, um, from the founder of Anthropic, uh, Daria Amadei, um, and he basically tried to take this positive approach, yeah? And he
mhm,
said, okay, what could we do with all this intelligence power in a way? And just the advancements he can think of in biology and medicine, things like that, yeah, could be really amazing and
mhm.
really beneficial for us as humans. Yeah. So
Yeah,
let's maybe take a broader view instead of
yeah,
just thinking about replacements of technology jobs,
sure.
which could happen. Yeah, I mean, there can be very interesting things happening. And there are two things. I mean, we remain human beings. First of all, we are typically very creative. Yeah. And we are I think people will start to think of different ways how to employ themselves to do. Yeah, and maybe we don't even know today what that is. And secondly, there's still the human interaction. Yeah?
Mhm.
So we still want to talk to each other, have fun with each other, care for each other, stuff like that. Yeah. So this will not go away. So I think maybe there's a big shift now in what people consider as being work, yeah, or what they actually will doing. But this is
Sure.
all quite hypothetical. But who knows?
Who knows? But my hunch is that humans are going to seek out things that are more uniquely human. I wrote about this the other day on LinkedIn, where I said that this is actually the golden age for human generated content, precisely because I think there's already a
Mhm.
backlash to AI generated content. Uh, you see comments that are AI generated in LinkedIn, you roll your eyes and say it's another one. Posts that are AI generated. Meta got a lot of backlash for their AI profiles
Mhm.
just the other day. And my,
Mhm.
my big question is who's asking for this at all? Like I in no scenario want to chat with an AI persona on
Mhm. Mhm.
Facebook or Instagram, but
Yeah, yeah.
to me it doesn't make any sense. And I don't know anybody who's asking for this kind of stuff. But I think increasingly with I think the term is slop. When there's more of that, there'll be you know, attending conferences, for example, more in-person stuff. I think that this is going to be more and more important going forward, precisely because AI, as of right now, can't do that. So,
Yeah, agree.
yeah, it should be interesting. Well, cool. I guess kind of closing out, what do you think AI does um, to companies like yours? Like, how are you guys leveraging AI?
Yeah, that's, I mean, we are in the content creation business partly. And obviously, that's right now, it's in the phase where it supports us. Yeah. So if you write a research note, if you write a study, you are more productive. Yeah. You're more efficient by using what Gen AI can do to support you here. Um, We were also thinking about, is it threatening our business model. And I would say partly yes, because now more information is even easier accessible. Yeah? So you can ask the analyst a question, but also the LLM in a way. But then it comes back to the original content, yeah, to the and right now what I see is you get always this historic knowledge, yeah, about things, but not very current, first of all. And secondly, for example, we run a lot of surveys, and this gives us primary data. So something that has not been seen by any LLM before. And this is really original data, and it needs some interpretation. There, even a machine can help a little bit, but the data itself, yeah, that's really fresh and new. And I think there will be a need for that going forward to have this unique, as you said, human-generated content, but also, let's say, empirical data that is new and helps you to understand what's going on. But you cannot find that in the historical data that LLMs have been trained on.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I definitely think that'd be your moat or the surveys and the connections that you have
Mhm.
across the industry. I don't see how AI is going to do that today, but who knows?
We all don't know,
If
but
they all
right
talk to
now,
each other, I guess, then all bets are off. But yeah, should be interesting.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great talking to you, Carsten. As always, I guess for people who want to learn more about you, how can they find you and Bark?
Yeah, it's spark.com, very easy
Bark
website.
with a
And
K or a C?
with the C, it's the original name was Business Application Research Center, so
Oh,
showing our university roots. But everyone says Bark, and it's with a C. And I'm also on LinkedIn and happy to connect, obviously.
and you got a podcast, right?
Yeah, the Data Culture podcast. Thanks for
Oh,
mentioning that.
yeah.
Almost forgot. Yeah, it's really about this data culture topic. So how can we improve that? We talk about data governance. We talk about also applications of Gen AI. We talk about use cases in finance and many different topics, starting from very strategic, a lot of organizational things like around governance, how to yeah, bring data culture into organizations, but then also very concrete things about single organizations that share their road towards more Gen AI usage and stuff like that. So it's pretty broad in the data space, but has always this data culture approach to it.
Nice. I think you had my friend Shamak on there too, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yeah, she was there recently. Yeah, we were
oh,
talking about, interestingly, yeah, the state of data mesh in 24. And obviously, things have advanced, as we also discussed a little bit. And I thought that was quite an interesting discussion because I also thought she took a little bit of a different viewpoint from what I heard before.
mm,
So she's now emphasizing more the technology aspect, which I thought was quite interesting.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. So everybody go check out Carson's company and podcast. And yeah, thanks for the great discussion, Carson. Well,
Thanks to you, Joe.
hopefully,
Bye
yeah,
bye.
see you around.